who's on the phone, we're partners in Charter Oak Research, which is a marketing research company that serves Christian schools around the country on the areas of data-driven decision-making and marketing and brand positioning. Dave, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. No, just good morning. It's good to be with everybody.
Yeah, we do appreciate the opportunity to meet with you this morning, and we'll jump right in into the topic. And you know, we have 5 marketing mistakes, and there's probably another 5 or another 50 marketing mistakes, and we all know what we often see, lists of 5s and 7s. They tend to be popular for web-based lists of things to either avoid or make sure that you have. I saw something about the number 1 mistake people make in choosing a college, and then in parentheses it said, and the other 9 are not really that far behind. So you can use whatever kind of list that you like for these types of things. But these are observations that David and I have made through the years of working with schools, helping them understand their market, their brand positioning, and their parent population which they serve. So the idea behind research is to help us avoid risk. Anytime that we're leading an organization, anytime that we're leading an activity, there's risk involved. There's risk involved in us making the wrong decision. There's risk involved in us not making a decision at all. But to be truly innovative and to lead effectively, we always want to try and minimize the risk. And in trying to minimize the risk, we're going to try to use research as best we can. Even the strongest leader, the most convinced on a subject that they may be, when they lack research, when they lack evidence, it's easy to waver when some might question our decision, some might question the approach that we're taking. But when we have research behind that, that decision, it can be a huge help. There's some problems with that, though, and we'll get into some of that when we talk about these mistakes. In not necessarily knowing how to use it effectively, or not necessarily seeing some of the warning signs that are associated with that research. But marketing research is a systematic gathering and recording and analysis of all types of data, both qualitative and quantitative. You'll often hear from people that you work with, for example, they may say, well, that's just anecdotal, when you come back with some evidence from some people that you've interviewed. One of the helpful things is to understand the difference between anecdotal and qualitative. Some people may not like your sample size, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not research. Some people may not like qualitative research. They might prefer quantitative. But we shouldn't automatically dismiss small samples, and we shouldn't automatically dismiss informal ways of gathering data, because it can be very powerful, and many times that's what's available and that's what we need to use. But when we take that information and we use it to make decisions, that's when it becomes marketing research. That's why we do research. We do research because we have a particular decision that needs to be made, and we need as much evidence around that decision as possible. It would be foolish or unnecessary, at the least in many ways, to use research if you don't have a business decision that needs to be made. Then it's just sort of information that you'd like to know. And that's not really what we're in the business of gathering. We're in the business of gathering information that we need to know in order to make a decision. So the first mistake that we've observed is believing that we are misunderstood. We all know people like this, right? This is not just our schools, but this is people in general. It's in many ways it's human nature. We often think that we're misunderstood, and in reality, we're usually not. The facts are that most people have a fairly good perception of who we are as individuals. Most people have a fairly good perception of who our schools are. Now, there's areas where there's going to be gaps, and that's okay. That's important to find those gaps and find where people don't know where we're misunderstood. That's the mistake. And I just want to move this. So the issue to deal with when we believe we're misunderstood is misunderstood by who, and what does that misunderstanding look like? There is the temptation to decide, since we're misunderstood, to take certain marketing actions that would be very different if we weren't coming to the assumption that we're being misunderstood. And we have a couple examples that we can talk about. One example, we've done research with a school, and the parents that we researched viewed this school as having some real areas of gap compared to schools that they were also considering for their children. One of two things can be done with that information. You could decide that the perceptions that the parents have are wrong, or you could decide that, well, let's investigate it a little further and figure out where some of those perceptions may be possibly accurate. So the right response in that particular school's case, this is a school we worked with, this was a school that had a good product. This was a school that was doing a lot of things right. But when research showed that when parents were comparing them against some other very high performing schools in the area, this school was losing out in the parents' perception. After doing some kind of internal work around the quality of the product, the leadership team in this particular school figured out it was a mixed bag. There were some things that were accurate, and there were opportunities for improvement. There were some things that were not accurate. So what do you do then? And then you do craft some situations where you can market to that mistake or to that misperception. And in that case, the school's strategy was effective. The school effectively changed people's perceptions of how that school fared vis-a-vis the other schools that they were looking at. Another example is some research showed that a very large number of parents that explored this other school came away not being convinced that their child was going to get a good product when they came to that school. So they had a very high inquiry rate, a very low kind of conversion rate into applications and then enrollment. And so in that particular case, and it's actually, it would be a tragic decision for anyone. And so it would be one that we would definitely recommend against. This particular school decided that the best strategy to undertake would be to create a public relations strategy, a public relations message. And their attempt was to sort of PR their way out of the problem. Any casual observer from the outside, if they would have sought additional insight, would have confirmed what the parents were indicating, that there were real problems with the product. The PR route can be doubly dangerous because what it can do is it can bring more people in to explore and investigate a subpar product. So if increasing awareness of your product just brings more people to see something that has real gaps and real problems, that can have actually a negative effect, certainly not a positive one. Dave, do you want to add anything on those examples?
No, I think it's a great thing to try and really get a good understanding of what our customers think of us, because from there we can start to adjust and educate if that's what's necessary.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the truism, knowledge is power, absolutely pertains to this situation. We want to have a culture of really understanding what people think about us. A culture that clamps that down or suppresses that does us no good. A culture that is always open to exploring what people think about us is the most healthy, because then we find out things like what customers think about us. What did we not know from that? What have we learned as far as how to respond to some of those perceptions? How can we change? How can we make adjustments? There may be some things that might be short-term changes. There may be some things that would have to be longer term and part of a sort of a larger conversation. What was true and what wasn't? In many cases, we will find that there are perceptions that are outdated. And that's where just having the information is important. But assuming that people are misinformed, assuming that they misunderstand us, really does us no good, doesn't give us any ability to act on the information. So the best assumption is when people think certain things about us, let's take that information, let's do exploration, let's do research and find out whether or not it is in fact true. So the next mistake is not giving others what they want. From a marketing perspective and from a marketing research perspective, supporting that, not giving people what they want is the second mistake. Why should customers get what they want? One of the things that's helpful to think about in this particular case is all of the other situations in which we tend to operate in our life. Think about, for example, what has been your experience shopping recently? What do you remember most about customers? In very few other markets would we ever hear certain language used that we sometimes hear in Christian education when it comes to giving the customer what they want. And we find that this can be a huge challenge when it comes to both us responding to people, but also in creating the right culture across the organization to be the kinds of people that respond to the desires of the customers.
It's actually, I was going to add, Paul, oftentimes if we're at a conference and we say the word customer as our current families, our current students, it can ruffle some feathers even in that. But as a Christian school, and for the privilege it is to serve families and to serve students, customer is the most bland way of saying it, but it's really our brothers and sisters that we're actually working with. So trying to come alongside and support what their goals are is really imperative for us, as long as it keeps us on our mission as well. Yeah.
Now, go ahead.
So Paul and David, you just hit on something there, though, as you said, is serve the customer, but yet at the same time stay on mission.
Yeah.
Okay. So talk a little bit more about that and how that happens, and how staying on mission is part of serving the customer, but yet serving the customer has to be a key to fulfilling the mission.
I agree, because I think most mission statements that we'll see hopefully will include, especially for a school, the students and partnering with families. So I think inherent in our mission also speaks to who we're actually serving as well. So I think it fits really well with that, I believe.
Well, and to kind of piggyback on that, when it comes to responding to customers, that is our way to actually be on mission. If our mission is to serve families, if our mission is to educate children, to partner with parents, all of those people are outside of our staff and faculty, for example. They are the student, they are the parents. In many cases, there are other stakeholders that might be outside of the school. When we don't have an approach that builds the expectation that we treat the customer well, what we're doing is we're now serving a different constituency. We're now serving an internal constituency. So if our mission is to serve families, to partner with families, to serve children, and our culture is not a culture that expects that, then what we're really doing is we have a different mission. We've actually turned our mission a bit to now we're serving ourselves. And if you look at the other organizations, there's always a combination of the need to do customer service and then the subject matter experts. And that's no different in Christian education. In many ways, we do know what's best for many families. Professional educators do know what's best as far as the approach to use to teaching, for assessing, for bringing that child through the educational process. But that's no different than any other organization. Apple engineers do know what's best as far as the creation of a computer. They do respond to customers, but they are the technical experts. When I go into a store, I don't have to be the expert to get them to give me what I want. They're responding to my customer expectations with a product that is great. And it's the same thing that we would find in a school. We can treat the customer well. We can give them what they want and what they need. And some of that involves talking them through their expectations. I would just say it's a great exercise to go through with a leadership team about their own experiences as a customer in other settings. Those are huge opportunities for us to grow. We've been in settings where I'll use Apple again as an example, because we will be in some school settings, and it's probably a temptation of any of us to say, when we're talking to a parent, we want them to really want us. We want them to be convinced that we're the school that they should be. And many, on a number of occasions, I've spoken with admissions professionals that they basically want the customer to be sure that they want that school before they move them along through the process. Well, I just had a daughter going off to college. We went to the mall to look at two things. She wanted to look at a Surface, and she wanted to look at a MacBook. And when she went into, we happened to go into the Apple Store first. And when she went into the Apple Store first, the customer service representative asked her what else she was looking at. She said she was looking at a Surface. He wasn't off put by that. He wasn't upset. He wasn't threatened. He continued to talk to her about the MacBook, continued to find out what she was interested in, what the needs were, what she was going to use it for. And in the end, his kind of refusal to be off-put by the fact that she was looking at something else served them really well, and she never even made it to the Microsoft store, which if she had gone there first, they probably would have treated her just as well, and she probably would have walked out of there with that. And it's all about the customer service in those cases. This is a real problem. The third mistake, doing what's easiest. When it comes to doing what's easiest, this is very much related to actual research that David and I have been involved with. There are many times where we will find ourselves in a situation, and you will find yourself in the situation as a school leader, to not know exactly how to best get the information that you need. And you may have the temptation, or there may be the temptation among your colleagues, to go for an easier solution that is absolutely going to rob you from having some of the best information. This is specifically related to what you will need to know about your market. And just to use one example, Dave, I'll cite exit interviews. Mm-hmm. In many cases, we will work with a school and we'll find, we'll ask them, what are you doing as far as exit interviews of people who are no longer there? And of course, they do exit interviews. That's best practices. That's what you should do. You should reach out to families that are no longer there and find out why. And so we'll look at some of the results of those calls or some of those interactions, and there's no meaningful information there. There's nothing that the school can use to make any decisions or to make improvements. So on a spreadsheet that is turned over to a number of different people that have that responsibility, answers will come back why this family left or why that family left, and the answer will be something to the effect of, for family A, it was the child's decision. For family B, parents decided to go somewhere else. Those are not meaningful answers. Those are not things that let us do anything with it. They shouldn't be accepted, and the expectations at an organization should be that that's not an answer that's acceptable. But what happens is that task is given to someone who has a number of other things, and their primary responsibility is not research, and they have to get it done. And so in that case, nothing is able to be done with that. Whereas if you either do it internally or externally, assign someone with the task of actually bringing back meaningful information, so that then you and a leadership team or whoever is responsible for that can strategize around it, develop approaches that can make meaningful improvements and differences. So that would be yeah, go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say one other thing. Even when you see responses like school culture, without really digging deeper into that, that doesn't allow us to see, is that an instance or is that a pattern? And what does that pattern tell us? What can we change in our programming? What can we do differently to come alongside that group of students if there is patterns? And it's, I agree with Paul. I think the idea of getting depth of those responses is just so essential for the school to continue to grow and thrive.
Right. And so that does tend to be something that David and I do a lot of, because if everyone is responsible for something, no one's responsible for it, right? If it's a task that you spread out among your team because you need to get through this list, that just is a recipe for disaster. And it's also not always a great use of their resources either. So that's one example. On the question of how is our population changing? We know there's many times we sit there and we scratch our heads and we say, I know that the people who are looking at us are different than they were 10 years ago. There's fewer of them. The parents seem older. They have less children. Whatever the differences are that we're observing, sometimes we don't take the next step and dig in to find out why. There's a lot of information out there about demographic trends and changes. There's government data that can give us what has happened in the past. There's other subscription information that can tell us what's likely to happen in the future. That's the way to understand how a population is changing. That's a better strategy. It actually gives us the ability to have a strategy rather than to simply speculate on what we're seeing difference. What do we not know about our particular area? Do we know that certain zip codes have been declining? Do we know that others have been increasing? Do we know that the map or overlay of where our school family is coming from has changed? Those are things that we need to be on top of, and that's what research can give us. How are we perceived? The way we're perceived is often not the way we think we're perceived. On many, many occasions, we will do research and the leaders of a school will be surprised, at least by some element of the perception. Many times, go ahead.
Guys, can I ask a question? Because you talk about, the difference between what's easiest and what's best. What's something that you've seen, whether, as we go into open house season or as we go into really this push for admissions for next year, what's something that you've seen that, people, have latched onto as this is easy, but it's by no means best as they prep for kind of this part of the cycle?
I can give one thought, and then Paul certainly adds something. But I think a lot of times we'll lead with messages that we think are really important for families without doing the work of researching with new families. What was it that helped you to make a decision about why you chose to come? With the idea that the next group of people that would be considering us would probably be similar and be looking for the same type of information. So just continuing to roll out the same messages without testing them, without knowing what's current, is it's just short of the expectation, I think, and trying to do the heavy work of trying to identify what's working, what's not working, testing it, evaluating it, and then repositioning it at those open houses for sure.
Yeah, I'd give an example, and it's a little bit related to the messaging that David talked about. We often have very strong advocates in our school that are great at communicating. They could be teachers in any one of our divisions, and probably an easy strategy would be whenever we have someone coming into the school and we're going to walk them through a particular division, we want them to see that particular teacher. But that's not a bad strategy. It's great to put them in front of faculty. It's great to pick your superstars. All of those are great, but that's a relatively easy thing to do. What's more difficult is to make sure that we're working with all of those superstars to give them the material so that they're on the same message that the school wants to communicate. So that's the example I would use. Is the easiest isn't a bad thing. It's just not the next step that ought to be taken. The next step that ought to be taken is that they're all given the same messaging, that they're all given the same information on what matters to parents. So our teachers may be great advocates for our school, but they don't have the knowledge behind that to know what matters to parents. So they may talk about certain things, and we haven't necessarily resourced them, which is the difficult part, so that they are able to talk more effectively. This happens a lot with parents. Parents are great advocates for our school, but volunteers are notoriously self-deployers, right? And so they self-deploy in situations where they talk about what they love about the school. And the problem is that's not necessarily what we know from research that most people love about the school. And just to cite a horrific example is, you may have a parent that says, well, we're here because we don't have any of these problems at our school that we see other places. Well, A, it's not true. B, there's not a lot of parents aren't looking to hide their kids or shield their kids. And that person is also, in the end, not going to be a very secure parent anyway, if that's the reason that they're at the school. Because we know that if that's a reason, they are often the ones that are most at risk. How are we differentiated? We'll get into that a little bit later on the next topic, but that is something that we want to know. How do people think of us as different from the other schools? What barriers exist to enrollment? You know, we are full with people that love our school or love our school. They all explored the school. They part with a large amount of money to go to the school, and they're there and they're generally having a good experience. Well, someone didn't like your visit experience. Someone didn't like the application experience. We want to know what barriers exist to that we didn't intend. There's going to be some things that we do intend. We all have mission fit issues. We all have enrollment requirements. We all have numbers challenges related to certain classes. All of those things may be true, but there's going to be other barriers that we'll uncover that were not intended, and that's what we want to be able to have information on. And how are prospective parents making their decisions? Do we really know how parents are making the decision, what factors they are weighing in making that decision, and who they're comparing us to? The fourth mistake is talking about ourselves. And the warning is, be careful talking about yourself. This is true in any business setting. One of the challenges we run into is we talk about ourselves at the expense of hearing what other people want us to talk about. So research should answer some questions. Research should tell us the things that we mentioned earlier, what the community thinks about us, why they think that way, what needs to be communicated. But when we talk about ourselves without having that information, we're really shooting in the dark. We have no way of knowing that what we're saying about ourselves matters to the people that are listening. And that is really one of the challenges with talking about distinctives. We don't know unless we research whether or not our distinctives matter to people. And one of the things that David and I will do as far as researching messaging with schools, and this is one of the things. This is not a Christian school specific approach to research. This is a business approach to research from other industries. We actually borrow it from a pharmaceutical field, and that is when we're talking about a distinctive, we want to talk about three elements of it: unique, believable, and motivating. How unique is the message that we're talking about? If we're saying that we have classes 5 days a week, that's not that unique, right? If we're saying that we have a day during the week that has some specific elements that are different from the other days, that it may be more experiential, that's a distinctive. If we have classes 4 days a week and the fifth day they have off to do other things with their family, that's a distinctive. I'm sure there's some other distinctives, but is it truly unique? Yes, it's unique. Then is it believable? If we say that we have a day that is full of experiential learning, and they come visit and see it, and it doesn't look that different from a normal classroom setting, we're not delivering on that element of what the distinctive is. It's not believable. And then the third piece is it motivating? Does it matter? That's the so what. Okay, we have late starts 3 days a week or whatever, 3 times a month, and it allows our faculty to work in learning communities, and you would not believe how good that is for your kid. They come and they see, oh yeah, I see they do have these certain days, that makes a big difference in the schedule. The teachers seem to love it. I really don't care about that as a parent. It doesn't make a difference to me. I haven't been convinced that that's going to make a difference when it comes to telling me what matters to me as a parent. And that's really the challenge ultimately with this idea of talking about ourselves, is we don't really as a customer want to hear about the salesperson. We don't want to be told about the other person. So as a school, the only time we should be talking about ourselves is how it impacts the student. Our teachers have these expertise. You should see how that bears out with your child. You should see the things that they do in a class. Otherwise, we're just talking about ourselves, and it doesn't actually pertain to the family and to the child.
One piece to add here, I think, is the reason why you do research is because each market and each school is working in a context that's completely unique to somebody else. If you're in a more rural area and you're the only Christian school within 30 miles, your uniqueness might be more geared around some of the Christian atmosphere. But if you're in a more of an urban area, there may be 3 Christian schools within 20 miles of each other. And then you're going to have to be able to speak to your unique selling proposition a little bit differently than maybe another place. And that's where research really comes alongside and helps the educator.
So guys, can I ask a question real quick as you kind of on this point of, the distinctives, the unique, stuff, but then the believable, like what are some of the things that, as we talk about ourselves that people don't really care about, you kind of, they have to be some of the things that exist or the expectations. And then how are the places where we get to talk about ourselves and where it really matters? Are there specific examples or more specific examples you could give that would be tangible, saying, hey, stop talking about this stuff because everybody's got it? Or it's just an expectation of our culture, of parents, of students, of education, of the profession, and talk more about these things.
There's actually a few things related to that, and the idea of stop talking about some things because everyone has them. There is we absolutely agree with that when we're talking about crafting messages. But then there's also a great deal of evidence out there, for example, on safety, right? A school has to get over the safety threshold for parents. So a lot of research, one of the key factors that parents are looking for, especially in an elementary school, is safety. Interestingly, a lot of the research that Dave and I do, that doesn't necessarily come up as much, and it's primarily because of the schools that we're working with have sort of already met that, and so it doesn't sort of rise to the level of interest that the parents want to see. But that's an example where you may not need to talk about that all the time because everyone has it, but you also need to demonstrate it. So there's some things that just have to be demonstrated, and we have to be aware of those things, and we can't be aware of them if we don't do research. Moving on from some of those basic requirements, we would definitely agree. You don't need to talk about, for example, in an elementary school context, we would say that the amount of conversation around the warm and caring environment is not a distinctive. Unless they're coming from a failing public school. It's even true in public schools. Most people have very high satisfaction scores of their public school on this issue of caring and safe environment at the elementary level. So how do we show that and not necessarily use as much of our time by talking about that and then showing them things that their second grader is going to accomplish and be prepared to do and equipped for later? And in the end, what will happen is that child, the parent can envision them in high school and then later in life. So we see a lot of the research would indicate that that's not a distinctive, those soft elements at the elementary level. What is a distinctive would be if you can do things differently than are being done in their current environment and then can demonstrate, make it believable by showing what do our graduates look like. For example, and Dave talks about this a lot, how do we show, is there a difference between students that have been at the school longer than other students when they graduate? Can we show that there's real effect? Can we demonstrate to an elementary parent the portrait of what a graduate is going to look like from that school? Those are the things that make what we say more believable. Dave?
Yeah, I think, Paul, you hit on some great ones there. I think the idea about caring teachers and things where I think, all the time we'll hear from public school families talking about how they got such sweet teachers, yet they're looking to leave because of, it could be core curriculum, it could be because of not looking at biblical training and things along those lines. And I think oftentimes it's not about the teachers not caring, it's just the product isn't what they're looking for as a family. So I agree. I think that's a great example of one of those things. I think also some of the benefit that we have in creating, whether you're doing a view book or whether you're doing postcard series or whether you're doing videos, I think so much you can show those things, the safety, you can show the caring while speaking to a better curriculum, a more profound impact that's going to have on a student, but still showing those things that we know matters, especially at the prospect or inquiry stage, which would be very different than what they'd be looking at from the accepted to enrolled stage. I think that's the other thing is what we say at the inquiry stage may look a little bit differently as they go through the admissions process. And I think that's another one of those things that we want to make sure we continue to tailor that message and go deeper into that as they go deeper into the funnel.
Yeah, and those are also related to the fact that we have a number of different customer segments, a number of different types of people. We talk about what might be compelling to one group. It may not be as compelling to another group. All of that is really related to this fourth mistake, because when we're talking about ourselves, the one thing that we're also not doing a lot of is listening. And that is a very powerful tool to gather information. As we listen to the customer, we can know when they come in, for example, and they're visiting, where they're coming from, what their current school situation is like, how they first heard about us, what made them, want to visit. All of that information will let us know that this is the type of parent that is, and these are the things that we can say to them. We can't tailor a message if we're not listening to the parents. And once they're in, we can't improve, we can't make changes, we can't respond to their needs unless we're listening to them in the school. The most at risk parent group is a 1-year-old family, a family that's been there for 1 year. That's a group that has to be, resold to continuously throughout that year. How do we do that without listening? We can't. And mistake number 5 is not having a plan. This is true from a couple different perspectives. One is research should be part of a larger plan. If we do research, it should be to answer business questions that we're going to use to develop a marketing plan that will support a enrollment plan that will be part of a strategic plan. So all of those things ought to be tied together. Otherwise, we're doing ad hoc pieces of research, or we're making ad hoc marketing decisions that are not part of a larger plan, and we're not going to have the effect really that we need, because planning is absolutely what matters, and it's going to make what we learn from the research more effective. So many schools we go into, we visit the school leader or a member of the leadership team, and there's just a number of surveys and reports on their bookshelves. What was done with them? I'm not saying that nothing's been done with them just because they're sitting on the bookshelf, but we know time and time again what happens is the report is delivered, the research is finished, and there's not a real strategy about what to do with it. And again, it ends up being a real waste of resources and a waste of people's times. And the other thing is, it's terrible customer service for your internal constituencies to do research and not respond to it. You don't always have to give people exactly what they said. You do have to respond to it. People know they've taken time to do a survey, for example, and they expect someone else to take time to respond to it. They're very generous with their time. If you're thinking about reaching out to parents, if you're thinking about even reaching out to people who explored your school and didn't come, you will be surprised at how forthcoming they will be with information that will help you. They're generally not on a mission to be critical or vindictive. They usually respond very positively that the school is trying to make kind of ongoing improvements. But to not respond to that after that person or those people have demonstrated goodwill in providing the information is a terrible mistake, and it's a lost opportunity. Then once you have the information and you are responding to it, making it part of a plan is really what gives us the ability to take the information that we've gathered for enrollment and say, what do we see here that might also be useful for what do we see that can help us craft messaging for marketing? We work with a number of schools that have crafted messaging specifically bringing into the process marketing research that gives them insight into what people have said matters, what motivates them, what features are important to differentiate or use to distinguish the school. Dave?
Well, I was actually just going to follow up on one of the chat. There was a question about some of the ways the admissions department can connect with administration, which is a great topic. So maybe we can come back to that before we close out.
David, maybe even, go with that of the planning process.
Yeah, I think that's great.
How often do you see, in that planning process, the disconnect between the admissions department and, and the administration or the upper levels of leadership, depending upon the size of the school?
Yeah, I think that's a great, I came from a higher ed background, and it was always fascinating where so many times we would have different goals that would conflict against each other because we had so many different constituencies, whether it was the faculty or whether it was the president or whether it was a finance office, and different goals compete against different things. So I think it's imperative for as best as you can as an admissions team or admissions office is to really get time with senior staff or be part of senior staff or get time with the head of school to really say, if we could paint a picture of what we want enrollment to look like, let's work on that. So we're not just kind of shooting in the dark and just trying haphazardly to get just a bunch of people to fill out our seats. But how can we get deeper kinds of goals? Male, female. Do we have diversity goals? Do we have income goals? Do we looking for people that have fine arts background or athletic backgrounds, and the really even academic preparedness? I think trying to get deeper sets of goals instead of just top line number goals is really important.
Can I ask a question too? As you look at those goals and the admissions and the planning processes, oftentimes in school, it seems like in schools we're either ad hoc planning on the roll as the year's going on. But if we do have a plan, it's often just a 1-year plan.
Yeah.
What would be a good time frame to say, we need to be flexible, we need to be innovative as we're going, but is it a 2-year, a 3-year, or a 5-year plan that allows us to implement, allows us to move forward, allows us to be really thoughtful and prepared for what's happening in our market?
Yeah, my first thought, and Paul, obviously you'll have some thoughts here. I think 3-year plan is a great number. And I think when you get to 5 years, I think those last 2 years are so far out that the world can change so quickly. So I think a 3-year action plan is really good. I think you should get started on it right away. But I think a 3-year piece would be really good. I think one of the parts of research that Paul discussed a little bit earlier is we can provide expectations of zip code populations 5 years in advance. And I think that can be really a great tool to help just to check to see, are you seeing anything different with demographics and things like that? So it'd be, it's gonna be really hard to say we want to grow enrollment by 10% if we know our demographic and our key zip codes are declining or they're getting older and they're not bringing in young families. So those kinds of things can really work hand in hand with that 3-year plan.
Yeah, I would just add that on all of these pieces here, that as you develop a plan, we would say that research can drive virtually every part of it. When you're looking at trying to assess your situation, you're not going to go into any kind of strategic planning process without doing that. And one of them is absolutely to find out what is our current demographic like. What's it expected to look like? Who are we competing with? There's no way to have an accurate assessment of our situation without doing research, without gathering data from internally that we've been collecting forever. Schools have more data than they often know and are often capable of dealing with. But at the same time, there's a huge set of data that can be useful as you explore your situation and develop some situation analysis. And from that, you develop goals. As David said, you can't develop a goal after you've done some analysis and found out what your projections are. You can't develop a goal for growing enrollment unless another one of your goals is, to take over another school or to add programs or whatever. They have to tie with one another, and there has to be evidence behind the goals. And then there has to be action plans to get there. Those action plans also should include assessments, should include research, research in this case, for example, you can do parent satisfaction surveys to find out how you're doing on some of these goals. We should be a culture that assesses everything that we're doing. And so again, assessing back, looking at how we're making progress on the plan. And again, if you're looking at enrollment as part of your overall strategic plan, leading into the enrollment plan should be the marketing and marketing research plan. So you have really 3 steps. The marketing enrollment plan feeds or supports the the marketing plan supports the enrollment plan, which in turn supports the strategic plan. So again, I think, as Dave said, 3 to 5 years. 5 years is a long time out, especially for these more granular plans that feed the strategic plan. But once the strategic plan is done, really the process has to go back down, and then making sure that the enrollment plan is connected, making sure that the marketing plan supports that, so that they have the resources in place for that. And then
I think,
go ahead. Go ahead. Because
just wanted to add the last thing there was that, and I think when we're being assessed and we're going through accreditation, those plans need to fit in with the overall strategic plan for the school. And I think that gives a lot of comfort to those that are going through the accreditation, that you guys are working seamlessly together.
So David, you can see the chat box, and,
yep.
and Paul, the question, and I think the last two questions from Ashton School and then Tricia Ayers is, how do you get feedback from parents who've gone through the admissions process, whether they, I think probably in this case, the majority of, oftentimes the majority of parents are chose your school, or maybe even a minority or majority didn't choose your school. Mm-hmm. And then, the second question, is it common to send out mid-year assessments? So how do you get that feedback from parents in the admissions process, or at the end of it, or mm-hmm. later? How often do you get assessments from families? Focus groups, surveys, how does that work, and at what regularity and what sophistication?
I think it can be in a lot of different ways. A lot of times we would do surveying to the entire group, emailing them a survey and having them finish that up and send it back to us. And we would say typically that's done in the first part of the year. If it hasn't been done in the past, I don't think it's bad to do it in the second part of the year, or right around New Year's, right after that. I think there's also a good opportunity to just say in that, not only how was the admissions process, but how are we doing this year? So a lot of parent satisfaction surveys can also be done that way. We'd also say that it can be done informally as well, just one-on-one meeting with a handful of families, or bringing in a group of parents to talk about how was the admissions process, where do you think that we can improve, other areas that you think we missed on. And then phone calls tend to be probably the most difficult, but they can also provide really great depth of information for us too.
On the first question about parents who have gone through the admissions process, again, that's a group that should be surveyed. They can be easily surveyed. That's probably one of the larger areas of research that Dave and I spend our time doing, is working with schools, taking a database as complete as possible from the earliest of inquiries all the way through enrollment. And so there's a difference between a family who inquired but didn't apply versus a family that applied but didn't enroll. So there's ways to kind of break it out even more specifically along those lines. What wasn't enough to move them along through the process? So we typically do those surveys online. If the sample's too small, then we do some telephone depth interviews and turn those more into conversations rather than surveys. But if there's enough, and there usually is enough if you're looking at the entire admissions database, there's usually enough to do actual online surveys, which gives us the ability to go pretty deep. Again, responses tend to be pretty positive, more for us than for internally, because we're an external group, and that just makes it easier for people to respond. So that would be certainly the way to reach out to that group. And that is absolutely the place that's going to give us the most immediate information on how we're doing. On that final question related to mid-year assessments, some schools are doing student course evaluations, so they would tend to do them twice a year. If they have semesters that they only have a class for a semester. So whenever the class ends, you would do an assessment with students. But to Dave's point, whenever you start a survey with school families, it's not so important. There's certain times of the year you would avoid. You wouldn't necessarily do a employee satisfaction survey at the end of the school year. Parents, that's led to some problems for some leaders.
Hey, Paul, can I ask a question about maybe, just even some of this stuff as you're putting it together? I think it's mistake 4, mistake 5. Mistake 5, not having a plan. How much is a CRM important to that plan? The management system that is the backbone, and then, how often do schools have one and don't use it, or how often do schools try to plug the gaps and try to fill pieces when, if they had one, they'd be able to generate some pretty robust information and data?
Yeah, I think, and I know Dave's shaking his head, so I know he wants to comment on this too, but I would say, just from a very high level perspective, I would be very surprised if an element in a strategic enrollment plan did not include some discussion around a better use of a CRM, because there's probably no school that's doing it, as well as they would ever want it, to do it. So I would say, if any school that's developing an enrollment plan that doesn't speak to their CRM, whether it's getting one, being better at it, holding people accountable for it, or whatever, that will be in that plan. So that's how important it would be.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is, and sorry, my computer cut out with some internet issue there, but so I may be duplicating what Paul said, is, so much of the school's revenue is from tuition. And I think it's crazy to think that we shouldn't have a robust CRM system to help be able to serve families well in our communication plan to them, and the way that we would assess things and help them through that process, that it's a great opportunity. And most of the times, we don't need something that is too complicated. Oftentimes, if we just do something thoughtful and planned and done well and executed well, I don't think we need all the bells and whistles oftentimes that a very high expensive CRM has for us.
So then let me ask this next question, because I think it goes back to a little bit of what's already been said. And as you guys dig deep, you're going back to mistake 4, what's easiest and what's best. And I know we're talking to some admissions people here, but it's easy for an administrator, a leader, a school head to hire an admissions person and say, go make the plan and get us kids, get us families, grow our school, right? But the best is to have a strategic plan that is really laid out by, the leadership team. And I mean, would you guys suggest that oftentimes the best setups are when, an admissions person is the key component to the extension of that leadership team?
Yeah, I think, first of all, the admissions person is going to be the one that's mostly the one that's talking to external customers before they become current families. Heads of school do a lot of times where they'll speak at open houses and they'll meet with current families, but it's obviously going to be the admissions people are going to be the ones that are going to most know, the ones that are starting that process and understanding that process. I think the move in higher education from admissions to enrollment, or now even into advancement, is the idea that it's going to be much bigger than just the new families coming in. That enrollment is going to be dictated by obviously the new families, but also on how well we are serving the current families to see what retention and attrition looks like. So a more well-rounded plan would include other areas, because retention is just as important as the admission number coming in. I think, and just to finish up with that, as you go into the advancement model, so often it's going to be the admissions people that are going to know the families as they come in, and can be a great resource for a development office to understand. These are potential families that they've talked about seeing the plans of a new building and saying, oh, that looks really exciting. It might be somebody you may want to stay in contact with. And I think without those groups talking together, we miss out on a lot of opportunities.
So Paul, we got about 5 minutes left if you want to take us through kind of the conclusion. And then if people have any other questions, please type them in. And then Paul and David can kind of respond as we wrap up here in the next few minutes.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that all of the mistakes are, purposefully broad, because it really gives us an opportunity to talk about and think through how they're going to impact our mission. And it was mentioned earlier, that's really the key to what we are trying to avoid when we're talking about mistakes, is how is that going to take us off mission, How is it going to keep us from accomplishing our mission? How will it distract us from it? How will it keep us from communicating it effectively to others? And so, the last mistake is not having a plan. Admittedly, that really kind of encompasses a lot of the other elements that we're talking about. So I think really the goal is, how have we made improvements based on avoiding some of these mistakes? How have we avoided missing things? How have we worked on our messaging and crafted our messaging by listening, for example, or by not assuming and actually doing research, or by not necessarily taking an easy approach, but instead finding the best person for the job. I mean, Eric, to your earlier point just now, that is an easy way out. The easy way out is to look at our current resources at times and say, it's easy for me to task this person with that. And our example that we cited earlier about exit interviews, there's really no other explanation for the types of answers that we see at places other than the fact that an easy way out was to just divide up the task and get it done, instead of having, again, as the end goal is insight. The end goal is for us to have insight, not to get the task done. So whether that's an internal person that actually is accountable for the answers that are provided, or whether it's an outside resource, those are both things that would help us avoid that particular mistake. Having the plan allows us to take the strategy of not always reacting to the situation, but being proactive. When we understand demographics, we can be okay if there's a slight downturn in our process of getting to where we need to be, because we have the data behind us, because we know that this is what is expected. We know we may not experience growth until we have some new plan in place, or some new program, or some new strategy. Without having data, it is very difficult to be proactive. And Dave, I think you had another comment on how these things are all connected.
I think the last thing I'd want to just say is, and maybe this can lead into another webinar if anyone has interest into it, is the idea that we have to get past the idea that marketing is an expense to the organization, instead of that it's an investment into the organization to help drive our enrollment. We all know that word of mouth is the biggest thing, and we think that's the most important thing. You can use marketing money to invest in word of mouth, even internally. That it's not just going to do a billboard, or going to do direct mail, or doing a radio ad, or things like that. We can invest in doing word of mouth advertising with our current families, as well as those other mediums. But not to think of it as an expense, but to see it as an investment into your product.
So if anyone has questions in the future, feel free to follow up with David or me, and we'd be happy to talk with you. We'd also be happy to just answer questions as they arise in how you're working in your own school, and share with you some of our thoughts on some possible solutions that we might be able to suggest.
Yeah. So as we close up, Paul, why don't you is there a place where they can go to get more information, or to connect with you? And then since most people are from or came through the CASE website, is there anything with CASE that you'd want to highlight from your perspective on some of the work that you and David have done?
Yeah, well, certainly on the CASE website, David and I have both provided blogs in the past on marketing research issues, or marketing issues related to Christian schooling and Christian education. So that would be one place to look, not just the items that we've provided there, but also a number of other good sources of information on the CASE website. David and I can be reached at charteroak.us, and that's the best place to find us.
Cool. And then just so people know, we'll the PowerPoint and the recording will be up online. So if you want to get access to that and share that, I would expect that to be on the CASE website next week. So thanks, Paul. Thanks, David. We really appreciate your time, expertise. And if people want to hang out for a little bit, I'll stay here. But if you need to go and you have a meeting, we thank you for taking some time and joining us today.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. It was great to connect.